Good evening. So Stephen Rogers got the chop today from the Ministry of Environment, and he's been switched now to intergovernmental relations. And this is after Van der Zam had said that Rogers is not in a conflict of interest, but is perceived to be in a conflict of interest. Well, there's no doubt that Stephen Rogers, with his family trust involved in mining and lumber and goodness knows what not, can be perceived to be in a conflict of interest. But now Van der Zam has switched him to intergovernmental affairs, which includes Indian land claims, and with the same family interests, Rogers could perceptibly be in another conflict of interest. So what's Van der Zam going to do next? Fire him from that portfolio too? The nub of the matter is that the guidelines laid down by the Premier of the province are, and they've been described accurately, vague, toothless, and woolly. And as far as the Premier himself is concerned, he, by the way, is the sole judge, it would seem, of what is a conflict of interest. But he forgets that he had to relinquish the finance portfolio because of his apparent conflict of interest in owning a large sum of money to the government's principal bankers. Now, and when he quit the finance portfolio to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest, and I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with that because he was involved in all these business affairs before he became Premier, the fact is that as Premier, he is still involved in the same conflict of interest. Nobody's saying that Van der Zam did anything wrong either. But as I told the Premier before the election, what bank in BC could have the gall to call his loans were he ever unhappily in default? What we need now are specific, detailed guidelines. Perhaps we need to go back to some form of visible trust. Perhaps we need some kind of independent authority which says when a man is about to be appointed to the cabinet, you can't be appointed because you have a conflict of interest. And I have some sympathy for Rogers just now, because on his situation, it can easily be said that no successful businessman or anyone with family money can run for public office except as a backbencher. So I suggest that Bill Van der Zam lift up the phone to Brian Smith, his wonderful Attorney General, and get some decent, understandable conflict of interest guidelines prepared with a system of visible trusts. And having said that, here's Ted with a rundown.
The last time BC teachers walked the picket line was 1983. Now, 3 years later, are they any closer to having full collective bargaining, including the legal right to strike? Elsie McMurphy, president of the BC Teachers Federation, says it could be soon.
I think it's got to come within the next few weeks or months that we see the government is in fact willing to sit down and talk with us about it.
And she's coming up with Webster. But first, are BC's healthcare facilities leaving many of our psychiatric patients out in the cold? Doctors say there's just not enough room for psychiatric emergencies. On the crisis of psychiatric care, Doctors Joseph Noone and Maelor Vallance are in the studio with Webster.
Dr. Maelor Vallance is a prominent psychiatrist in Vancouver, and he sits on a hospital issues committee, correct?
That's right, Jack.
And Dr. Noone, Joseph Noone, is the director of the VGH Psychiatric Assessment Unit. Simple question. I've been concerned about these stories about the outpatients or the patients who are not in Riverview having difficulty getting psychiatric treatment and accommodation. Do we have a crisis?
We have a problem, and we have had a problem for a number of years. The mental health services are underfunded. As you know, in this province, we spend about $3 billion a year on general health services, and we spend about $250 million a year on psychiatric services. Given the number of patients that we have, with an incidence of about 5% of the population with serious psychiatric illnesses, and I'm talking about schizophrenic illnesses, that's considerable underfunding.
5% of the population, 5 out of 100
That is correct.
Problems with schizophrenic illnesses.
They have problems with major psychiatric illnesses, including schizophrenic illnesses. That's right.
Well, does this problem come from the very root that when we used to have 10 years ago about 5,000 people in Riverview, now we've got 1,200 people in Riverview because of the government's policy, I sometimes think for cheapness in some cases, of de-institutionalizing Riverview patients?
Well, I don't agree that there were that number of patients in Riverview at that time. About 10 years ago, there were 1,200 patients in Riverview with another 500 in the Valley View complex. And there are now about 900 in Riverview with about 350 in the Valley View complex. That's the geriatric psychiatry complex.
So it must have been 20 years ago when there were 5,000 people
That's
in
right.
Riverview.
You have to go a long way back. And nor is it simply the government's policy of de-institutionalization, and certainly not for cheapness. De-institutionalization is not cheap. It's expensive. But it's a far better program than having these large institutions on the edge of cities with programs that are by and large as old as the buildings that house them.
Let's ask Dr. Noone now about the problems you have in the psychiatric unit in Vancouver General Hospital. Do you have problems?
Yes, we currently have problems in, I guess, which can be reflected in a number of ways. The biggest problem we have, in a sense, is that we have more referrals than we can handle with our resources, which is another way what Maelor said is we're underfunded for the task we've been asked to do.
But you're not a psychiatric hospital. You only have a small unit for psychiatric use in the General Hospital. Am I correct?
Yes, but we handle the majority of psychiatric emergencies in Vancouver. We do about 2,500 assessments every year, and half those people are admitted to hospital via the psychiatric assessment unit.
Well, you can get them in, and there's always a bed for them in the hospital.
No, there's not.
How many beds are you short?
It's
possible to put it in that
it's hard to put it in those terms, but it depends on where the beds are. But we're probably short 5 beds for emergency management, in other words, to decide where the patient should go. And overall, my own estimate, we're short of 20 adult beds in the city for acute presentations of psychiatric illness.
So therefore you have a rush every now and again down at the General Hospital, and you've got the people sitting up all nights in chairs, and you've nowhere to send them.
That is correct.
Well, that shouldn't be, should it?
No, it certainly shouldn't be. The hospitals are
Let me
short.
get something clear. Is there only psychiatric emergency treatment in St. Paul's and the General Hospital?
No, that isn't correct. Other hospitals will deal with psychiatric emergencies, but the Vancouver General Hospital is a unique service. We have several unique services in British Columbia. When I say to you that our services are stressed, it's not to say that we don't have good psychiatric services, but they are very stressed. One of the unique ones is the emergency department at Vancouver General Hospital, where we have one of the very few specialized psychiatric emergencies.
But I mean, I get an impression that people from halfway houses, and there must be hundreds and hundreds of people in halfway houses for former mental patients, who have to come to an emergency, and then they've got nowhere really to go for their treatment, unless in the hospital. Am I right?
You're correct to a degree, Jack. I think the importance is any emergency service operates at very close to full capacity to be effective. What's happening now is we're a little bit over full capacity. The difference is probably a very small percentage. The difference is probably in the terms of about 5%, although when you're at the firing line, as I am, you perceive it as being much more. So in other words, a small increase can in fact help the problem immensely.
But what's the answer? But there is a problem nowadays on the streets of the city. You can see them, you know. 20 years ago when I was a boy, everybody was locked up, right?
That may
30
have been
years
so.
ago, 40 years ago.
I'm not sure what you see in the city. I don't think that you see much by way of unhoused psychiatric patients. We have an extensive boarding home program here. We have something like 627 hospital beds in general hospitals, excluding psychiatric hospital. So it's not a question of an emergency in housing. We have too few boarding home places, there's no doubt about that. And one of the problems is that patients are waiting longer in hospital to get one of these boarding home places, so the duration of stay is going up in the general hospital system, which means, of course, that Joe can't get his patients from the emergency into general hospital beds when they need it.
Well, one of the assistant deputy ministers was telling me they're going to finish their final study of Riverview within a couple of months. What do you think should be done? Is Chris Clinic still operating?
Yes, but not quite the same way as it was before.
Is it
but it's
an
still
emergency facility?
No.
It's not?
No. It's a tertiary referral. What will happen with the mental health plan is that the plan will do two things, really. It will give the broad outlines by which we will develop services over the next 5 or 10 years, so that any new service that develops will broadly fit the principles of the plan. And it will also do more than that. I think it will give an impetus to the development of services in any event and help the coordination of these services.
So you want more halfway houses?
We want more halfway houses, we want more general hospital psychiatric beds, and we want support for emergency departments in other hospitals, particularly in areas like Surrey. You know, there's 200,000 people out in the Surrey area. There are 20 psychiatric beds.
And you have to cope with the people from Surrey and New Westminster, or does the Royal Columbian have a psychiatric unit too?
The Royal Columbian has a psychiatric unit, and we kind of share areas like Richmond and Surrey, which don't have adequate resources themselves.
But you have never yet been stuck in finding a bed for a seriously disturbed patient who comes into the emergency.
We do what we can to move them to a hospital bed. If necessary, they will have to wait in the emergency until a bed becomes available.
And then you'll find if there are any beds available throughout the other community hospitals and send them there.
That's correct.
Do you get many people who come disturbed from the halfway houses?
It depends on what you mean by halfway houses. We get a lot of people from the
boarding homes, is that
boarding
right?
homes.
Yeah.
We get a fair number from boarding homes, and we have relationships with certain boarding homes, and we try and place the patient in the least restrictive place for the patient. So if we can stabilize them in a few days and get them back to the boarding home, we would prefer to do that than, for instance, shipping them out to Riverview for a longer stay.
Period of time, yeah. Riverview must eventually be closed, right?
Oh yes, the buildings are in poor shape now.
I'm told it's a fire trap, a health menace, all kinds of things.
Well, I don't think it's quite as acute as that, but sometime in the next 5 years or so, the buildings have to be replaced.
Dr. Maelor Vallance and Dr. Joe Noone. Now, I don't know what kind of telephone response I'm going to get to this program, but we'll try it anyway. If you want to speak to a psychiatrist, but he will not diagnose you or me tonight after the break. Add them up yourself.
100,000 sick people.
Just a minute. $3 billion a year we spend on healthcare in BC.
More than that.
Well, 3.2 billion or something.
Right.
And you say only 250 million on psychiatric services.
That's right.
What should it be?
Oh, well, if you consider that we have about 100,000 seriously ill people in the province, and that's people suffering from the most serious illnesses, and we can probably treat adequately about 30 or 40,000. Now, we do a pretty good job for the others as well.
You're not saying
not up to that.
psychiatric conditions.
I'm talking about psychiatric conditions, yes.
100,000.
Take 5% of the population with serious illnesses.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, with the 1,200 beds at Riverview being closed out, how would you perceive the beds and the attached funds being redistributed in the mental health system?
If Riverview was closed down, how would you perceive, gentlemen, that these available funds, if any, would be distributed in the mental health system?
And the beds as well.
And the beds as well.
I think
That's a good question.
If the beds at Riverview are closed in the first place, there would have to be bridging funds to open up alternate services before these beds were closed. You can't close the beds first and hope that you get the services afterwards. Other countries have tried, that doesn't work. Likely, much of the acute care would be attached to the General Hospital psychiatric units, and they would have to be expanded. There would have to be an expansion of the community care program so that there were more boarding homes. The Greater Vancouver Mental Health Services, services would require to have an expansion of their community care team system.
In advance, it's difficult to get the money.
In advance, you have to get the money before you close out the beds that you have already, or we would have chaos.
But you'll still need more beds at the General and the other hospitals that take psychiatric patients.
Yes, I will, and I agree with Maelor that it's an expensive proposition, because to get it on stream, it means it probably costs more to replace the beds and have them up and running before you close down the beds at Riverview.
However, whatever the plan is, there are some of these services that we know would be common to any plan. For example, we know that there have to be more services out in the Surrey area. There are a lot of people, too few services.
Fair enough. Thanks, ma'am. Go ahead from, where is it, Qualicum Beach?
Yes, hello, Jack.
Yes.
I'd like a question answered by Dr. Vallance, if he can, please, regarding a young family member we had that was at Braymore Lodge for some time, and they were looking after themselves mostly there, with very little help, which concerned us a lot. And the second question is, do premature babies stand a chance of becoming schizophrenic more so than just a regular born baby.
Oh, do you want to take a medical question on that one?
Well, not particularly. I'm not an authority on that, but I doubt very much whether the incidence of schizophrenia is any higher in premature children. The incidence of other things is, but I'm not aware of any...
Do you know about this Braemar Lodge she's talking about?
Not particularly, but not that one particularly, but you know, there are different levels of care in all of these boarding homes, and since I know nothing about that young man's condition, I can't really say what level of care would be appropriate for
Go
him.
ahead, please.
Yes, I have a member of my family who's diagnosed as schizophrenic, and he seems to be slipping through the cracks in the system, and I was just wondering what would be done if Riverview is being closed to help this person in my family, that the only way he seems to be able to get help is to commit a violent crime. Riverview keeps turning him away. If Riverview's closed, where is he going to get help?
That's a good question. I get this question half a dozen times a year.
Well, I'm sure you do. I don't think that Riverview can be closed until other services are in place. That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question has to do with the competency of patients who have these serious illnesses. One of the difficulties is that they have so little social competence that, as the caller says, they fall through the cracks in the system because they can't find their way through the system. And one of the proposals is that such people should have managers as part of their care, where there are individuals who more or less take over the day-to-day activities of those
Isn't that
patients.
the function of some of these halfway houses?
It's a function of the people who work in the halfway houses, but there are people who are skilled in taking these services particularly.
Okay, sir, can't help you much. I get that call quite regularly.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
You don't know what to do. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering if you could help me. I've been waiting for 2 months to get into the Shaughnessy Hospital, into the psychiatric. I've got bulimic, and I keep throwing up constantly, day after day. I do it 14 hours a day now, and I've been doing it for 8 months, and I'm starting to spend, like, into my food money, my household money, $25 to $50 a day. And I'm just wondering how far I have to go before I can get a bed. I'm dehydrating already, my enamel on my teeth, and there's just nothing anybody can do. I'm on social assistance. I can't get extra money for the food. I don't feel guilty because I'm buying it on food, but I'm throwing it up. I cannot stop. It's a compulsion. It's like an addiction, they tell me.
Hold on a second. This is a matter for our own doctor.
I think it's a matter for her own doctor. Most of the publications lately talk about outpatient care and day hospital care for people with eating disorders. We require some inpatient beds. There are now inpatient beds for that disorder recently opened at Health Sciences Centre Hospital, and of course there are places at Shaughnessy and at St Paul's also, I might say. But the selection of cases, of course, depends on the hospital and on her own doctor. What we do need, though, are more ambulatory care services for people who have eating disorders, because that's where they are more properly treated.
I don't see what else I can tell you. You've got to go and nag your doctor to go to the General Hospital emergency.
I've been there already. There's just no beds. There's just no beds.
In a case like that, you would give them temporary treatment and send them away.
That's correct, Jack. 3 out of every 4 patients that I admit is certifiably mentally ill. In other words, they're basically mentally ill to the degree that they're suicidal or homicidal. 1 out of every 3 patients is considered a significant suicide risk. So obviously we're taking the most serious of the mentally ill. There are many others who would be probably much better dealt with in an ambulatory component. And I, in fact, have asked for an ambulatory component to assist the Vancouver General Hospital in handling these people in the best possible way.
An ambulatory component, what's that exactly?
This would be an intensive day hospital experience where the patient wouldn't have to stay overnight, would come in where there would be a lot of skilled people to help them without having them to come into hospital.
We don't have one of these at all at the moment.
We don't have one at the Vancouver General. There's one at St. Paul's, not specifically for psychiatric emergencies, but it certainly helps.
Interesting. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I have 2 questions for Dr. Vallance. Yeah, is there a threshold in the brain that can be exceeded resulting in a mental breakdown?
Stress certainly can trigger off mental breakdown, but it's not the only factor in the major illnesses. There are other factors that we know now that are physical and that have to do with the physical makeup of the individual.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Yes, sir, Mr. Webster.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask your Dr. Noone there.
Noone.
Yeah. if a patient has a problem and he goes and he wants to see a specialist, why does he have to go through his own family doctor?
Oh, I'm not taking MSP questions. That's not on the topic at all. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, could you please explain to me what the rationale is in closing down Riverview with the oceans of lawn and green grass and trees and putting them in a sterile hospital where I work?
Now, that's not the rationale, and nobody had said that they're going to close down Riverview as such yet, have they?
That's right.
That's point number one.
It is, and the second point, of course, is that you treat patients much more effectively the closer you bring them to their own communities. The idea of the isolation and alienation to a large extent.
You mean the old massive open wards they used to have out there with 30 or 40 patients in them?
That's right, and separated from the city and separated from their own community, and for that matter separated from the rest of medical care.
And all the green grass in the world wouldn't help them to become relating properly with things around them.
Didn't help a lot.
Gentlemen, you've been very helpful. I know what you need at the General Hospital, and I know what you're campaigning for. 3 times the amount of money spent on proper psychiatric care services in British Columbia as soon as we can afford to put up the money.
Good start.
My thanks to Dr. Joseph Noone, Director of the VG8 Psychiatric Unit, and to Maelor Vallance. You have a funny accent.
Aye, same place as you.
I'll be back after the break. With the legislature going into session, with school board budgets coming up by March the 15th, with the BC Teachers Federation making noises, I asked Elsie McMurphy to come and tell me what she's up to this time. Did I remember correctly that the great professional BC Teachers Federation are going for the right to strike this time?
Well, essentially what we'd like to see is the legislation that teachers presently bargain under normalized, I guess is the word that we would use, to provide to teachers the right to bargain their full terms and conditions of employment, and to have what we're proposing to resolve disputes, that is the right to strike or the right to choose arbitration as a way of settling disputes.
Are we going back to, now let me get this clear. You want the full rights of bargaining. At the moment, all you can really bargain for is money.
Essentially what the School Act says is that our boards have a duty to bargain with us only salaries and bonuses. Many of our school boards therefore choose to bargain only salaries and bonuses, and some of the standard contract language that in fact is compulsory in other people's contracts, such as a grievance procedure or technological change clauses or personnel practices language, we don't have access to. And it's that kind of situation that we think we're highly overdue for achieving in this province.
That was because you've taken the kind of, quote, professional attitude that you didn't want to become a trade union as such.
Well, essentially, I guess our position is that one of the realities about teachers is that we are both educators, professional people, but we're also employees. And as employees, we think that teachers should have rights to, or access to, the same kind of rights that, for example, teachers in every other province in Canada have, and even private school teachers and college teachers here in BC have. BC public school teachers are the only group that seem not to have access to these kind of normal, legitimate processes.
I can understand you wanted to bargain for grievances. Would you also want to bargain for class sizes?
Yes, that's certainly a very critical example of the kinds of things that we think it's very important that we have access to at the negotiating table. And I think it's because teachers essentially are a profession that that's one of the really important things we have to address. There's probably nothing more fundamental to the job that we do as professionals than class size. It has tremendous impact on the way we teach, and it obviously has a critical impact on the way and the how our students learn.
Where do you stand in the wake of restraint as far as your money is concerned? You haven't formulated any wage demands yet, have you?
Right now we're looking at a situation where we have lost over the past 5 years under the Compensation Stabilization Program some 10 to 15% in comparison to the cost of living. At the moment, we're looking right now at a situation here in British Columbia where BC teacher salaries are among the lowest in Canada. For example, if I were to move to Ontario tomorrow, my salary would be $6,000 to $8,000 higher than it is now in BC.
And that's at a fairly good level of salary. I'm not going to ask you.
That is true within $1,000 or $2,000 for all of the categories of teachers in British Columbia.
What about unemployment
maximum.
of teachers? I saw a wake of restraint document here which says that there are now 3,242 fewer teachers in BC schools than in 1981-82.
That's correct. I think the interesting thing that we're seeing right now, though, is that although we may well still have an unemployed teacher population, we're already experiencing the teacher shortage that is evident in the United States and in the other Canadian provinces. I've just been, for example, in a northern district where they already have the teacher shortages, and I know also that some northern boards, in fact, are putting on the bargaining table the problem that they've recognized, and that is that they're going to have to increase their salaries in order to attract applicants.
But is the bargaining shortage because of budgetary problems or because of, it must be because of?
Well, that's certainly part of it. When as I mentioned, we have teacher salaries that are not competitive in British Columbia, where you have the tremendous vacuum that exists in the United States. They've got a teacher shortage of approximately 1 million teachers by 1990, they're predicting. And as I said, they're already experiencing the shortages across Canada. And so we're going to have to, I think, do something pretty deliberate in order to remain competitive and keep our bright people here, our good people here, and also to attract our able young graduates into teacher training.
Well, you lost a couple of hundred people to California last year, did you not?
Yes.
And they seem to be settling down quite happily down there.
Yes, I think that's really unfortunate that we're looking at this sort of train and brain drain. We've spent a good many hundreds of thousands of taxpayers' dollars training those people, and they're taking their expertise somewhere else.
How do you feel about Van der Zalm going in to make a budget, and he's shot $1 billion now? He's going to be pretty hard up unless he decides to go on a borrowing spree.
Well, one of the things that I think came through loud and clear in the election, and certainly the polls have confirmed that we and others have done, is that the public wants to see more money going into education. There's no doubt about it that education suffered more than any other section of our provincial budget during the last 5 years, and we've simply got to do something to restore.
In other words, the public accepts the fact that if there was any fat, it's now long gone.
I think that's very, very true.
On a different subject, I had, what's his name, Tom Brummett, the Minister of Education, here last night, and they haven't yet decided what they're going to do, really, on the prevention of sexual abuse in schools. Do you think that's a little cooler now? Do you think that we're going to be able to cope with it a little better in the future if he does implement things like reporting suspected colleagues? You changed.
Well, it's always obviously been the law in British Columbia that individuals are required to report suspected child abuse, and teachers have not been exempt from that.
No.
And in fact, what we did was add a rider, I guess, to our code of ethics to make it abundantly clear that teachers, in fact, were expected to do that. And that's certainly, we have no desire to protect anyone who's involved in
One
those
of the
kinds of
suggestions,
offenses.
of course, is checking of the criminal records, I suppose, of any teacher before they become teachers.
Well, our position, I think, is one that says we have to look at whether or not we want people who have those kind of convictions teaching our children, and we obviously don't. And if we don't, we would obviously support criminal records checks. The irony of it is that, to my knowledge, I think of all of the people who've been convicted of child abuse, I think the criminal records checks might have caught one.
Yes, I
But
understand.
in fact, it's probably the least useful way of stopping child abuse. I think what the emphasis has to be on is education.
So when do you go into bargaining?
Well, our locals are bargaining right now. We bargain, as you know, in 75 different school districts, and they're in various stages of negotiation right now.
I know you're not full of any dire predictions, and you think our school system is in fairly good shape, except that too few teachers teaching too many pupils.
Well, I think our school system, in some respects, is not in very good shape. We also have, I am ashamed to say, among the largest class sizes in Canada. I think we're only equaled by elementary classes in New Brunswick. Other than that, we have the largest classes, and I think that's a shame. I think we have to do something about those class sizes.
Your questions and comments to Elsie McMurphy, President of BC Teachers Federation, after the break. Go ahead to Elsie McMurphy of the BC Teachers Fed.
Yes, sir. Mr. Webster.
Yes.
One of the things I was wondering about is we have not been exploring education well at all in this province. The government hasn't seemed to thought about the fact that in order to pull in high-tech industry, which has been one of their interests, so they say, you have to have a very educated populace. This should go all the way from elementary school through universities. Is the BC Teachers Federation thinking about this whole prospect?
Yes, in fact we are, and this has been the substance of submissions that we have made not only to the Minister of Education and the Premier, but also to the Minister of Labour when he held his hearings on the labour relations climate in British Columbia. It's our view that education should be considered as not only as an investment, but as a way of attracting investment. Many of the American states advertise significantly their level of expenditures on education as a way of attracting business and industry to locate, to invest, to settle in their jurisdictions.
That must be one of our biggest Achilles heels, both at the universities and in the schools and in the colleges.
Well, certainly our participation rate at the post-secondary level and our funding of our post-secondary education is fairly embarrassing in comparison to the other provinces in Canada. We have the lowest participation rate. And certainly when you look at our public school system, there are very few areas, I guess, that we would want to put in an ad in Forbes magazine as California does,
well,
for
we lose
example.
35 to 40% of our end graduates, don't we? Don't graduate from the system.
Yes, the dropout rate has been very high lately, and I think that's in part because of a sort of streaming that's happened in our secondary schools. The emphasis has been increasingly on providing for the 15 approximately percent that go on to post-secondary education, and we're not providing, in my view, as well as we once did, an adequate education for the other 85%.
Thank you. That was a good call. Go ahead, please.
Hi. I'm kind of concerned about the teachers having the right to strike. 'Cause not only does it disrupt the kids' education, but then it disrupts the families and having to have a place to put these kids during the day while they're out of school. And what's it teaching the kids? You know, that it's okay to inconvenience somebody else for their own personal gain?
Well, in fact, I guess that's one of the problems we always have, is that the school system, not only does it educate children, but it provides a very important childcare function, and when that babysitting service is removed, then we do have problems. But I think what we're proposing, which is to acknowledge that teachers, as everybody else, has the fundamental right to withdraw their services, except, you know, as the United Nations International Labour Organization indicates, every person has the right to withdraw their services, except where it's an essential life and death matter. And essential as we think education is, it's obviously not life and death. But what we're proposing is a choice to use the withdrawal of services to settle disputes, or to choose voluntary arbitration, because teachers, like everyone else, are concerned that we have the least possible disruptions to the system, and we think having that choice of voluntary arbitration would provide
Let me get this. You would go into negotiations.
circumstance.
You would go into negotiations, have your preliminary negotiations, and then decide on the face of the climate
Yes.
whether you wanted the right to strike or whether you went into voluntary arbitration.
Yes, that's correct. And I think that there, in fact, are some issues that the school boards and the teachers would feel so strongly about. The school boards, for example, might lock teachers out, or teachers might decide to withdraw their services because they're fundamental issues that we have to come to some common ground on. There are others that we may decide to refer to an independent arbitrator to settle for
Give
us.
you more flexibility in which way you wanted to go, although you'd be excoriated beyond measure the moment you threaten to strike.
Well, in every other province in Canada where teachers have the right to strike, the education system there doesn't seem to be in any great disarray. In fact, I would suggest where teachers have proper access to full, free collective bargaining, relations with their governments in those provinces, in every case, are better than they are here.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. Jack, I'd just like to make a comment about the state of education. I graduated back in 1982, and when I went into college, the classrooms were so packed, it was incredible. One class, history class I had, there were over 40 students in that class. And I don't know how the teachers can take care of every student. I don't know how they can do that.
Are you talking about college or high school?
Well, I'm talking about college, because when I graduated in 1982, that's when the recession happened. And right after that, there were so many cutbacks, and the students were all flooding to the colleges.
Yes.
And I just don't know how the teachers can handle that, and I can totally understand the predicament, and I really don't know what can be done.
Okay.
I think what the caller has raised is obviously the critical question of class size and the ability of teachers, as the numbers go up, to deal with the individual needs of the students. And as you get 35 or 30 or 40 kids in a class, you simply can't do that, and you have to resort to a much more impersonal lecture style that
Not so effective. Go ahead, please, from Kimberley.
Yes, Jack. To Elsie, I was, my hair's almost standing on end hearing her say that there is a shortage of good teachers in this province, because I, for one, am desperately looking for a job, and I can't even get 1 or 2 days sub-teaching. I'd gladly go into the north, and I wonder what she has to say about that. How do we find work when we're sitting here looking for it?
I think what we're experiencing right now is the shift from having unemployed teachers in our province to, in fact, a teacher shortage. I think we're in that transition stage right now. As I said, we're already experiencing some shortages geographically. We're already experiencing some shortages in specialty areas, even in the Lower Mainland. And what we need to do, I think, is to obviously make sure that the people who are looking for work know where the jobs are available, because they are increasingly coming available. With the people going to California, with retirements accelerating.
Where do you find out? From the BC Teachers Federation?
We have a job board in our Unemployed Teacher Action Centre, and also I understand the BC School Trustees Association is running a job service as well. In addition, the districts are advertising now in the papers too, so it's a matter of keeping your eyes open, I think.
Thanks, Medea. Go ahead, please.
Well, my concern is, the question is why is it in today's, you hear more and more of them talking about classroom size, when in the day when they did have money, they didn't worry about it then. Why is it now that we're starting to worry about it? Thank you.
It's certainly not just now that we're starting to worry about class size. This is something that has been an ongoing concern of the Federation and educators generally for years and years and years. What has happened, though, in the past 5 years, that our class sizes have increased tremendously. And we're looking now at classes of 35 and 40 that we haven't seen for 10 years or more.
Wasn't it down to 19 or 20 at one time?
Well, what you're talking about is the pupil-teacher ratio, which is very different from
that's
class
a different
size.
Thing, because the pupil-teacher ratio takes in all the non-teaching teachers.
Well, it includes all the teachers, not all of whom teach in a regular classroom. They might teach in the library or teach in a learning assistance center or
Go ahead, please.
Therapy.
I'm a substitute teacher and a member of the BCTF. And I'm very seriously concerned about the pay raises for substitute teachers in the Delta School District. My experience includes 21 years in the BCE school system, 9 of which were spent in full-time teaching. In return, I receive $69.08 per day with no benefits, and I'm wondering what the BCTF is doing to help us.
Well, as I indicated earlier, I'd first of all like to acknowledge your situation. I think that your rate of pay is in fact abysmal, and I also understand that your district, your Teachers Association, is attempting to do something about that. The negotiations are conducted at the local level, though. The BC Teachers Federation doesn't negotiate with the local school boards.
I realize that, but I'm a member of the BCTF, and I would like some input.
Yes, you certainly have that through your local association.
Thank you.
Thank you. More with Elsie McMurphy, President BC Teachers Fed, after the break. Mr. Brummett, Elsie, the Education Minister, was telling me last night that he's not yet got his guidelines for the teaching of AIDS sex education in school. But I presume that you've been consulted.
No, we haven't, actually. I certainly would hope that the Ministry of Education would involve us in developing these guidelines. we don't think we have a monopoly on all the information about AIDS by any means, but we certainly do think that we would have something to add to a policy that would be developed, particularly for AIDS education in the schools.
Well, you've been very active too in being concerned with the prevention of sexual abuse. Are you doing any training of the teachers on your own? Now, that's done by the school boards.
Well, no, we've offered for years, actually, workshops in child abuse, and we're continuing to do that. We are trying to investigate, to gather information about AIDS. We've had a meeting, for example, with some of the people from AIDS Vancouver, and we've previewed some materials, and as well, we're working with the Canadian Teachers Federation on the development of a policy on AIDS. There are a number of areas that need to be considered. Obviously the rights of students to an education, the rights of teachers who might be teaching them, and the rights...
But it gets to the stage where one would almost advocate a mandatory course on AIDS prevention.
Well, it's hard not to be melodramatic about AIDS. It's hard to discuss it in dispassionate tones when the facts themselves are so alarming. And I guess I feel that because it is a life and death situation, if through an education program we might save one life, then I think it's worth having the education program.
So do I. From Courtney, please.
Good evening, Mr. Webster.
Good evening.
2 remarks and 1 question, please.
Right.
The first remark is, going from the start of your interview, your guest said, we are professionals. Now, my understanding is that true professionals do not have unions. The second remark, that wages are higher in Ontario. Well, I suggest then that those that think they are and wish to go or should go, they should go to Ontario, because we have teachers here that are looking for jobs, and that's attested to by one of your callers in, and then secondly by the number that have sought jobs down in California.
Okay, what's your question?
Now, my question is this. As educators, are they trying to teach students to cry and stand up and yell for something that they cannot get by the normal form of society and join unions and form unions?
Yeah, are you a bad example when you go for the right to strike? That's what he's saying, basically.
Well,
his other remarks stand by themselves.
Essentially, I think the caller is wrong when he says professionals aren't organized into unions. Many of them are, and I'll just give you a few examples. Teachers, nurses, various other healthcare workers, firefighters, police, and the doctors and the lawyers. And they have very, very strong unions who are very skillful at bargaining for them. Yeah. So I would dispute that remark. As for the second comment about why don't the teachers go to Ontario, that's one of the sad things. They are. They're going to Ontario, they're going to the other provinces, and they're going to the States, and I think it's a shame we're losing them. But I think the most important point of his comments was essentially, what are we teaching kids? Are we teaching them to stand up and yell for something? I think were his words.
Right.
Well, I certainly hope we are. I certainly hope we're teaching our kids to be assertive. I hope we're teaching them that they have rights, that they have responsibilities, that they need to be participants in their democratic society, that they need to be involved, and they need to be aware of what's going on around them. If we do nothing else for our students, I hope that's something we do, so that they are not the manipulated, that they are...
And you must teach them to get rid of the cynicism which envelops my generation, because we are so deluded by failed promises for 1,000 years. There is time to change the world.
I hope so.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
That's you from whatever it is, yeah.
I'm from Cranbrook.
Right.
Jack, I fail to see what good it would do to give the BC Teachers Federation the right to strike. They've had 2 attempts at a strike, and each time their own people have crossed their picket lines. And on several occasions, the CUPE, the maintenance people, have gone to strike, and the BC Teachers Federation have crossed the picket line, their picket lines. Now, in good times, they're members of association, they're professional people. Bad times, they're union people. Now, they always seem to be sniveling and whining, but they haven't got the guts to go up and do their own fighting. They expect somebody else to do the fighting for them. Now, back in the days just before NDP got in, and Tom Hutchison, I believe, had been the president, or was just the past president of their association, they put a great campaign on against the social credit government. and then they died. They seem to be opportunists.
Hey, good. Here's a very politically alert guy who remembered about the crossing of the picket lines by the teachers and by CUPE and the apple for the teacher, and he's seeing a rebirth of a more militant, aggressive, union-style BC Teachers Federation. How do you respond to that?
Well, I first of all have to confess that I'm not very proud of any teacher who did cross a picket line, whether it was our own or someone else's. I have to explain that I personally am not someone who would do that, and I would encourage my colleagues not to do that either. I think that it's an important fundamental tenet, I guess, of solidarity among working people, among employees, that you have to respect each other's I guess basically only sanction in order to resolve a dispute. And I think, though, that teachers, in fact, have, as the caller said, gone through some very, very, very rough times in the past 5 years. They've been attacked as no other group in our province has been. And I think that that has, in many ways, changed the way teachers view themselves.
When did you make the decision to go for the right to strike? Did you not have a referendum or something on it?
Yes, we did. Over the past 2 years, we've had a task force working, and that culminated in our annual meeting last year with a recommendation that we seek full professional and bargaining rights. That was then voted on by all our locals. We had an 83% majority on the full package of collective bargaining and professional rights for teachers.
And that's the way you're going to go this year?
Yes.
So that wouldn't be a provincial strike were it to come. It would be school board by school board, would it?
Well, essentially what we are asking for in our report is that same system of bargaining that we have now, which is the local Teachers Association bargaining with their local school board. And as I said, I hope that we will see the choice mechanism for resolving disputes.
My thanks to Elsie McMurphy, President of the BC Teachers Federation. I'll be back after the break. A message to all you women out there. Equal pay for equal work is not equal pay for work of equal value. Going to have a panel on it tomorrow night with Walter Block from the Fraser Institute, Maureen Headley from BCGEU, and Bill Rapanis from the Federal Government Equity Programs. That's on Webster at 5 p.m. precisely.